philosophers talk to our times towards the theory of common notions. So where do you start by understanding common notions? I gave you one with habit. Reason creates them. But there is, behind that question of where you start, a deeper problem. Do they exist independent of our thoughts of them? The notion itself, which is the wrong question. The right question is, in what sense do they exist? Are they chemical bonds that are there always? It's just we need to think about them. Or are they something else? Now, there are several things about common notions. First of all, Spinoza is very clear. Insofar as they are caught up in the actual existence of many things, they lack an essence of their own. And therefore they are not at all and never particular. They're all over the place. He kind of gives the example of the relation of motion and rest as this general example, or the attribute itself. But it isn't a terribly convincing example, if I'm honest with you. Because is the attribute really understood as a common notion? Or isn't it, in understanding the attribute, you're caught up with understanding what God is? And so you're actually already on the third type of knowledge. That is the move he'll make later in ethics. And as for motion and rest, well, motion and rest is it's a difficult phrase in Spinoza. It's a difficult phrase because it's the infinite and mediate mode. It's the means of difference. And motion and rest at its purest form is inversely defining. It is how he actually does difference. So yes, you would have common notions that allow you to predict what will happen as relations of motion from rest come speeding towards you. And you think, oh fudge, there's an arrow coming. Absolutely, you have those sorts of common notions. But he does say that they're not the most useful kind. And they are clearly kind of there and underpinning things, but they're not really what's driving this theory. If it was just a theory which says we all share relations of motion and rest, and that's it, here you go nowhere. So there is this question about in what sense common notions exist. Okay? And I think it's a real question. Secondly, how do they exist? I've argued before, and I'm going to say again, common notions make no sense as anything passive. You have to understand them as active. Now, if they're active, it always seems to me that in a sense they're making their commonality. The commonality is there at the beginning, it's the hook in. And then they allow you, through what they allow you to do, for the powers they give you, to create the commonality itself. The understanding of how these things are linked, caught up within each other. So the commonality itself needs to be active. It is a strange idea because we habitually understand commonality as we understand continuity, as a line, a continuum. It's already there. So we're already just going A. Oh, it's a common notion. Yes, all things are linked. Can't work like that. The commonality is actually, in the degree, created. And that creative power is what gives the commonality its power to change the world. That's why Spinoza feels the need to move beyond the common notions of maths. When he starts in Short Treatise, he is always talking about maths as his example. And maths is a great example. I use it all the time. I used it yesterday. I use it to understand how common notions work, because if you're a maths teacher, you read common notions and go, oh yeah, that's right. Because it gets a deep truth about the way kids learn maths through repeated examples, and then somehow they knock out a principle and you get a theory. But it won't do for understanding common notions in the physical world. I think you might be able to get where I'm going now. At least I hope you can. You see, one of the things you have to remember about Spinoza is where he exists within the history of science. And I always think it's terribly important to often remind yourself of that fact. He is linked very tangentially, but really enough, to that circle that immediately predated Newton within the British institutions, British Scientific Academy. Likewise, he is linked to Leibniz. So Spinoza is linked to all the great theoreticians of early modern physics. Early modern physics? Or really, I suppose I would probably call it the first modern physics, the physics of the Enlightenment, the physics of Newton, the physics of Leibniz. And yet he predates them. One of the errors I think that it is terribly easy to slip into when you are understanding Spinoza is to import into his ideas the theory of energy. I think I've had a go at it before. It's because I happen to know thinkers I really respect, like Keith Ansel Pearson, does that. He wants to understand simple bodies as if they were energy. And he wants to understand, therefore, essences as if it was an energetic force. Now, Spinoza actually can't say that. Well, you could say, well, he's reaching towards it. Well, maybe he is. Spinoza doesn't really have the maths to do that. And I think he's trying to do something else, because I do think he's here. I think he's on the same page as energy. But I don't think it's located, I don't think it's located in essences. I don't, for that matter, think it's located in simplest bodies. He's playing there with the Cartesian category. He isn't making the Leibnizian move. Leibniz creates the space for monads in that which cannot be explained by the mere physical world, and therefore has to be understood through the energetic world. And when he does that, he is explicitly taking a distance, at least I would argue he was, from Spinoza, as much as Descartes. Spinoza haunts Leibniz. He is the man, after all, who said if it wasn't for the monad, that is the theory of energy, Spinoza would be right. So I think you have to take that very seriously. But, of course, energy is the classic example of a theory of common notions. Let's just say it. Let's be done. Does energy exist? Well, yes, it exists, but it exists really as a notion. It doesn't exist in the sense that there's no point you meet. There's no point in classical Newtonian physics, I'm going to put it like that, I think, where you actually see directly how the light of fire, the light and heat of fire, shift and change and become kinetic energy, dancing the molecules upwards. There's no straightforward way to understand then how the convection waves of the sun heat up the earth directly. I mean, they travel through space as a sequence of waves, and then they excite the particles on the earth. And you might be able to understand, you can actually understand the physics of how they do it. But the transformation itself, the theory of the conservation of energy, I'm not going to get too bogged down, I could get bogged down in specifics. The theory of the conservation of energy, the idea that an explosion has kinetic energy, light and sound, and that is linked to something called the potential energy, the potential chemical energy before the explosion, which clearly isn't there in Spinoza's terms. It doesn't exist, it's made up in order to fit the maths, in order to fit the possibility of what will happen. The need for potential energy then, all that stuff, is pure common notions. What it does is it creates an idea of something that is shared across all physical objects, that catches them up, that changes them. And once you understand what it is, you can change the world and see how this common thing is being communicated one to the other, to the other. Unless you have that common notion, that physicality, the similarity between light, heat and sound, and a particle suspended in the air waiting to fall, I probably would argue it's not there. It's certainly not there in our perceived world. But once you actually have it in terms of understanding it in terms of energy, it absolutely is there. It transforms then how you have to understand what is there, how you have to understand what the world actually is, without having its own reality that is observable in the physical world beyond such an understanding. What's more, of course, a theory of energy transforms how you understand physics. It understands what you can do with physics and when and why. And all that sort of stuff. So energy is the classic, beautiful common notion. It's the theory that allows you to transform physical reality and explain it differently, understand it differently, to move beyond the perceived world of essences, the what is, to those forces, those commonalities that hook everything up one with the other. And I'm sure a generation later that is what Spinoza would have said. But something follows from that. I'm very careful in this, and I've said it at the beginning, I'm going to say it again now. I think I said it, that you have to be careful about assuming the simple reality of a common notion, okay? It is a mistake to give Spinoza a theory of energy, because you have to twist his words to say it. You have to twist how you understand things like essence to say it. You have to twist how you understand how he talks about power. To talk then about quantas of power or quantas of force or quantas of energy in relation to Spinoza is to have gone very far from what Spinoza does. Okay? But it is also to have gone very far from what common notions are. Because it would imply an external, obvious, actual existence of common notions themselves. And they don't. They exist within our heads. Their unity, their commonality is created as we apply the notion to the world. It's kind of constructed, as they say, in this strange sort of experimental dialogue that we have with the world as we learn about it. Their commonality, their reality, their actual existence, their unity in the attribute of thought, in the attribute of extension, is given in the idea itself. Now, why am I labouring at? I'm labouring at, because there is a sense in which that if you start to give independent existence to common notions, Spinoza very quickly dissolves into vapid New Ageism. Okay? And this is a huge danger. It's a huge danger that I always feel when I'm describing common notions, because there is something mystical about them. That energy, as the paradigm common notion, appears to allow us to comprehend, but falsely, because it gives it an actual reality. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. That is why energy ends up then as the universal term for describing anything that is kind of a common notion. So one of the things that all the lovely hippies and the Arias will talk about is the energy of a person, the way they can excite a room, the way that they project themselves out. And on one level you could say, well, this isn't energy, it's not physical energy, which it isn't. But is it a magical energy? No. Of course, what they're actually talking about is a common notion, but it's a very caught up common notion. They're talking about something that is within the nature of humanity and how we exist in other people's minds. So they are talking about a common notion, and they're trying to develop a language for understanding common notion, but it almost immediately goes into mysticism, into that somehow this energetic force is some sort of quasi-magical force that dances across the universe and makes the plants grow at the end of our fingertips, and all that sort of stuff. It simply becomes mysticism very, very quickly. And so what you have to be with common notions is ruthless on the vocabulary. Oh, and the danger of it becoming mysticism. I should explain the danger. If you simply say a common notion is there, if you simply say energy is there and forget about all the moves you have to make in order to understand it, then you've misunderstood what it is. It has an essence. You start to think of it as a natural pre-given, as something that you could just turn on, as if it was just there. The kind of the way we actually cheat electricity, for instance. We just plug it in and it does stuff. And we like to forget how it's created, where it comes from and why, and who made it, unless you're an engineer. In which case, of course, that's exactly what you want to understand. But most of us tend to understand the way common notions are revolutionize our lives as if they were a thing, and then get very blasé about their existence, We just assume that they'll always be there, like petrol. And that they'll be there cost-free because they're kind of a God-given and not an elaborate confection of humanity, created across common notions that do things, that change the nature, change the face of creation itself in the thinking of them. So that's true for electricity. It's also true for humans. Humans make their own energy, in inverted commas. They're caught up in the sense that they are how they project out, how they reach their fellow humans. That's a product of their essence, of how they behave, how they are and understand language, the rhythms of their comprehensions. It's all very, to say it's all very complicated is, I mean, it's such a truism, I feel almost embarrassed to say it, but it is. The early common notions, the complicated common notions that hook up humanity are genuinely difficult to understand. And it is genuinely difficult to find a language then that understands it, which is why the hippies of the Ariège will always talk about energy at that point. But it's not good enough. It's not good enough because it, by use of allegory, because it is allegorical at best, merely confuses one sort of common notions for another sort of common notions, which downplays the complexities of what is actually happening here. I have all sorts of words like that. I don't use the word vibe for exactly the same reason. A vibration is something in the physical world. Yes, it is a common notion, a way in which you understand energy in a different level, a way you can hook up different theories of energy together. And therefore it then gets used as a way to understand, to symbolize the way humans project out something else about themselves. But just to simply call it, say, good vibes, is to treat it as if it was a thing, and to have lost the sight of the very commonality of its common notion. What makes it what it is, and how it could be changed. And that is, I think, my point, is that this mysticism that can easily accompany common notions doesn't do their actual understanding any good at all, because it misunderstands the very nature of their power. Their power is that the idea itself, like the idea of energy and the conservation of energy, revolutionizes directly the world, allows you to mathematicalize it in the case of energy, allows you to understand how things hook together upon a great framework of movements and of changes that allow you to move beyond a simple world of perception and beyond a simple world of reality into a slightly different world. And the joy of common notions is that it is a demand that you explore that other world, that world you can never quite perceive, without slipping into easy and foolish mysticisms, keeping its complexity, but understanding that in understanding that complexity, you're actually transforming it. You're changing what it is, what it can allow, and what it can do. It's a complicated idea. That's why you have to be so cautious, why I have taken so long to start before I could even think about how I was going to try and explain it. Because I am aware that when I'm thinking about common notions, I just look like a silly old mystic, a long-haired hippie screaming in the Ariège. And I'm very cautious about that, because that is not right. That wouldn't do justice to Spinoza. To the oddity and the originality of the idea. A commonality that doesn't exist independent of the forces that create, independent of the idea that articulates elements, one with the other, to create a new compound that allows you to understand who and what you are and where you are within the world. As the theory of energy changed us, as the theory of vibrations changed us, I mean the theory of wave transformation, as the theory of elements changed us. Those are the great easy common notions. To understand that, what that means in terms of humanity, how theories of humanity change our very conception of who we are in such a way that is constructive, useful, and not independent from the theory. That is the challenge, to find common notions in the here and the now. Once found, they'll sit there and silently function. they'll kind of silently work. You could say, hang on, isn't this a contradiction? Didn't yesterday you say that common notions sat there transforming your mind, forcing you back to philosophy? And here you're saying they only exist within the activity. Which is it? Well, the answer, of course, is I want to have my cake and eat it. Common notions, once they are there, once you've revealed them, once you've started to think them in your mind, they'll always be bubbling up somewhere else. You'll always notice them somewhere else. So that I might abandon philosophy, but the common notions I had made that had made me a philosopher never abandoned me. So I was forever finding them within the stories that I told, within the art I did, within teaching. The commonalities would endlessly come back to me. And I would see connections between things. Because I had already unleashed them in my mind. I was already using them to construct a world. And then I used them as my principles for teaching to help kids scramble into mathematics. It is a very strange balance then. One I'm not sure that I've ever properly resolved, if I'm honest with you. Oh no, I'm sure I haven't. It's easy to say energy is common notions, and that is absolutely right. I'd die in a ditch to defend that. And therefore the independent existence of energy apart from the common notion is a question mark. It's always, you have to think, in what sense does it exist? That's fine, and I'm perfectly content with that thought. But with the rich ones that hook up humans, now that's a different matter. Understanding where the commonality begins, where the sympathy ends, where emotions begin, active emotions, passive emotions. Oh, that's incredibly difficult. That's why the man of reason is so prone to mistakes. That's why being a human is so very, very difficult. So time-consuming. And why we spend our lives having to be, to remake, restitch, and to become who we are.